And greetings. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast alongside Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. My name is Steve Deace, brought to you today by our friends over at Jace Medical. Who knows when the next time a medication that they used to give awards to gets labeled as horse paste right when you need it. Make sure you are prepared with the Jace case from Jace Medical. Get a backup of some of the most important antibiotic discoveries humankind has ever had, like doxycycline and amoxicillin. That's the standard case, and now you can expand it if you want to include a wide menu of medications, which would also include probably a lot of the medications you need, especially a loved one. If you've got a loved one on Medicare, they're completely at the mercy of things like the NIH and the federal government and the biomedical fascist state. This gives you at least some peace of mind. Take advantage of it now. Go to jace.com, J-A-S-E, for Jace Medical, jace.com/Dace, jace.com/Dace. Use the code DACE at checkout for a discount on your order at jace.com/Dace. All right, we got a jam-packed show here today. Steve Cortez is going to join us. He was in the Trump administration. Also from American Greatness, he's going to join us at the bottom of the hour. He just worked on a battleground state poll for American Greatness, and also I'm sure we'll have some thoughts on what will be the dominant topic of Aaron's montage here in a moment. Next hour, the most famous man in the world, who may indeed be the next President of the United States, and once again the most powerful man in the world, gave an interesting interview to Laura Ingraham recently where he delved into his thoughts on religion and spirituality, where it's at in America, what it does for people, and then his own beliefs. We will discuss that coming up, that clip in the next hour, because you know what? It absolutely reinforces an observation, Todd, that you have made about really what the metaphorical sides are in this election, okay? And you have talked about that Trump largely doesn't represent traditional conservatism as much as where most of America was, whether you lived in New York or New Orleans or in rural America in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? And there might be real issue differences and things of that nature, but no one thought that you couldn't vacation in New York. No one thought, I'm not going to send my kid to NYU. No one thought, I'm not going to send my kid to Cal Berkeley. Well, maybe people were still thinking that back then, but you know what I'm trying to say. Yes. All right. And then, and what the other side represents is essentially a takeover of America, so that those sorts of nostalgic moments just simply can't exist anymore. And I think you see that in the comments that the former president gives about his thoughts on religion. And we'll get into that next hour. Speaking of thoughts on religion, remember Trey Wingo over at ESPN? He was one of their NFL anchors for years. I don't know what he does now, because I haven't heard his name in like 3 to 5 years until this morning, because he was getting dragged all over social media this morning for his thoughts on Harris and Butker's contract extension. Cat ladies without purposely childless, hardest hit, of course. So we'll get into that for Pop Culture Tuesday here towards the end of the show. But before we get there, let us begin, as we always do, with Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by Learning Arabic today. Today's phrase is, hey, hey, ho, ho, all the Jews have got to go.
مهلا مهلا هو على كل اليهود أن يرحلوا.
That is the implicit mantra of the Democratic Party this morning as Kamala Harris passed over Pennsylvania Governor and Jew Josh Shapiro in favor of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
This is Tim Walz's legacy in Minnesota, presiding over the race riots of 2020, which burned sections of Minneapolis. He refused federal assistance to quell those rioters.
A society that does not put equity and inclusion at the center of it is certainly going to eventually come to the places where we're at. This is a moment of inflection. It's a moment of real change. It's a moment that those folks who are out there demanding this are not going to take a commission or a report. They're going to want fundamental change. And that is what I think that's one of the exciting things in the midst of all this.
He still won re-election in 2022. So who is Tim Walz? Basically, he's this. He looks like the dad of every white, suburban-raised Midwestern sorority girl who thinks Donald Trump is icky and really loves the concept of baby murder. Legislatively, he signed bills into law across his tenure as governor that any other radical Democrat would, making the North Star State a so-called sanctuary state for meatball surgery and chemical castration of minors in the name of gender, letting women murder their children late in pregnancy, gave driver's licenses to illegals, and all manner of other heinous, wicked policies. He was also instrumental in replacing the old Minnesota state flag with a redesign which looks conspicuously like a Somalian flag. As Todd said on Twitter this morning, it appears as if Democrats are banking on the normies being completely and totally checked out of anything other than surface-level image. Nancy Pelosi, your thoughts?
Whether it's, well, it's the first bill that protect our assault, our bill. COVID. Shots in the arm.
Elsewhere in Democrat land, Democrat Congressman Jamie Raskin says he doesn't care if Trump wins fair and square in November. He thinks Congress should act to make sure he never sees the White House again.
Again, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient because what can be put into the Constitution can slip away from you very quickly. And the greatest example going on right now before our very eyes is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which they're just disappearing with a magic wand, as if it doesn't exist, even though it could not be clearer what it's stating. And so, they want to kick it to Congress. So it's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025 to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. And then we need bodyguards for everybody in Civil War conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them, but these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job and interpret what the great 14th Amendment means.
Moving on, a federal judge ruled on Monday that Alphabet, the parent company of tech giant Google, broke federal antitrust laws as it reinforced its dominant position over online searches and related advertising. The ruling from U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta in the District of Columbia opens the door to a second trial to determine potential remedies to Google's monopolization of the search market. It marks the Justice Department's first victory over monopoly in 20 years. At least 5 U.S. personnel were injured in an attack against a military base in Iraq on Monday, according to U.S. officials speaking to Reuters, as the Middle East braced for possible new waves of attack by Iran and its proxies after last week's killing of senior members of terror groups Hamas and Hezbollah. Japan's stock market has rebounded today after its worst losses in nearly 40 years. The Nikkei was up 10% after closing Monday, trading down 12.4%. According to reporting at Real Clear Politics, citing anonymous sources within the Secret Service, former Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle wanted to destroy all evidence pertaining to that bag of cocaine found in the White House last summer. One source with direct knowledge of the incident told RCP that when Secret Service attempted to make a formal investigation into the matter, Cheadle stepped in and removed that Secret Service officer from the case. And finally, a palate cleanser. Maybe the Denver Broncos aren't the wretched hive of scum and villainy I've thought they've been after all. Here's Broncos legendary linebacker Randy Gradishar during his induction speech at the Pro Football Hall of Fame over the weekend, where he described how another legendary football player was instrumental in his salvation.
Buckeye native and my OSU teammate, two-time Heisman Trophy, Archie Griffin, somewhere down here. Archie Griffin, thank you. Archie years ago invited me to a on-campus Fellowship of Christian Athletes meeting Bible study during my senior year. Growing up, I attended church, but the gospel of salvation wasn't taught. That evening in '74, the gospel was explained in 4 simple truths. Truth 1, God created mankind in his image, and that comes from Genesis 1:27. God loves us and offers a plan for our life. Truth 2, mankind's problems are from Romans 3:23, that we've all sinned and fallen short of God's glory. Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death, our spiritual death. Truth number 3, God made a way, out of John 3:16, that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Jesus Christ's death on the cross, the darkest day in history, and Jesus' resurrection earned Jesus the right to proclaim, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. And the 4th truth, salvation requires turning to God. Repent of our sins, accept his forgiveness, and ask Jesus by faith to be your personal Lord and Savior. Archie, you were an OSU sophomore at the time when you invited me to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes meeting, the best invitation I've ever had. And at age 22, I received Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior.
And that's what happened while we were away.
Well, I had no idea we were going to play that clip as I wore this Michigan logo shirt with the 1970s era when Randy and Archie played Michigan logo. But all I can say to those Buckeyes is amen. And
did you know that about Archie Griffin?
That he was a serious man of faith?
Yeah,
I did.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that about Randy Gradishar. Now, if you're not older, Randy Gradishar back in the day was a very bad man. I mean, I mean that in the not in the Romans 3:23 context. I mean that in the football context, yes. in the right kind of context. That's a bad man. Okay, now he's an older man now, but you see in that clip the same instincts. Yeah. That when he was out there and he was bigger and tougher and in better shape and more athletic, but those same devil-may-care instincts that made him a very bad man on the football field, okay? You see those same instincts right there, in front of Roger Goodell and everybody that has tried to progressivize the NFL and what went on with Harrison Butker earlier this year and everything else. Dude just stands right up there, man. Yep. At what, age 70, 75, maybe 80? Stands right up there to their faces. You know, that's like St. Peter at Pentecost kind of stuff. You all killed your Messiah, so here's what needs to happen now, okay? Just straight up gives them the truth right to their faces. And that's a bad man. And I mean that in the best possible context.
Amen.
Aaron's montage is brought to you by, we have so many friends, I can't keep them straight. Which friend should we honor right now? Let's do Magic Spoon, because we haven't talked about them in a while. And if you grew up loving cereal as a kid, as I did, but as an adult, you're like, yeah, I don't want all that sugar, all the carbs, etc. Doesn't give me the protein that I need. Well, that's why you need to check out Magic Spoon, a nostalgically delicious cereal that tastes just like your childhood favorites, but without the sugar and a ton of protein. And if you're already a Magic Spoon fan, I've got big news. Magic Spoon has turned their super popular cereal into high-protein treats that are light, crispy, and taste like those classic crunchy cereal bars. Magic Spoon's brand new treats are so delicious and have already become a favorite. If you are an after-gym protein snacker, that's what you're looking for. Because every serving of Magic Spoon cereal has 13 grams of protein, 0 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, so you can feel good about what you're eating. The most popular flavors are fruity and cocoa, and there's so many more. With the treats, Magic Spoon's brand new treats, they're crispy, crunchy, and an easy way to get 11 grams of protein while you're on the go. And for the first time ever, Magic Spoon treats are available in grocery stores with delicious flavors like marshmallow and chocolatey peanut butter. So get $5 off your next order at magicspoon.com/DACE, DEACE, or look for Magic Spoon in your nearest grocery store. That's magicspoon.com/DACE for $5 off. Magic Spoon, hold on to the dream. By the way, I've tried the peanut butter. I thought it was really good. All right. So I'm shocked, but I'm not shocked. And here is what I believe happened. I do believe that they were going to pick Josh Shapiro. I mean, these people have already set a precedent that they have no issue with swapping things out when they think there's too much heat, too much smoke. We just saw that, right? Okay, if you can do that with a sitting president, you can do it with virtually anything else. The hardest thing to do is to push out a sitting president without any mechanism other than your own will to power, force of will. So if you can do that to a sitting president, then you can just do that comprehensively to anybody that you hold leverage with whenever you want, right? I do believe that they were going to pick Josh Shapiro. I do believe that. And I think that was leaked out there. I don't think the Philadelphia mayor just... oh, snap, I hit the wrong button, and here's the video announcing Josh. I don't think that they were going to announce Kamala's running mate in Pennsylvania to then select another governor from a different state. I don't think they were going to do that. And what I think occurred here is, we were joking on our side that poor Tim Scott grew a beard for nothing, right? Okay. Didn't get picked to be Trump's running mate. All right. How did our friend and colleague Daniel Horowitz put it this morning on Twitter? He posted something like, "Man, Josh Shapiro grew back his foreskin for nothing. Grew back his foreskin for nothing." I mean, the dude disavowed, being in the Israeli Defense Force, Jewish. I mean, my name's not even Shapiro. What are you talking about? Okay, I think what happened here is the CARE, Hamas, anti-Semitic caucus that we saw rage on college campuses earlier this spring that really put them in a vice grip with some of the major donors on their own side. I think that they knew if they put their strongest VP candidate in the race on the ticket. And why is he the strongest? Josh Shapiro. Think again, respect your enemies. I keep having to say that to people. I shouldn't have to. Be adults. Respect your opponents. It makes, I've never understood when you beat a great team chanting overrated at them. Help me understand that. Why would you want to diminish your own accomplishment, correct? Oh, they're just idiots, morons. Well, they keep beating us. I'm kind of hoping they're not idiots and morons, because what does that say about us, right? Mm-hmm. We've lost 3 election cycles in a row.
Yes.
Okay. To people that most of our people think are dumb, idiots, morons. Okay. They are not like us. They are way more ruthless. Somebody said this once, right? They are way more ruthless, persistent, and want to win way more than we do. Somebody was saying that recently, I remember. Anyway, I think the word went out that the juice wasn't going to be worth the squeeze. That Josh Shapiro just won his last election in Pennsylvania by 15 points. Pennsylvania would have been taken off the board. I mean, Ronald Reagan couldn't beat a candidate in his own home state in the greatest election rout in American history, okay? It is not easy to beat a candidate in his own home state. I mean, even when you have a historical mandate, it's hard to do. That's the only state, meaning that in Washington, D.C., which is not a state. Minnesota was the only state Walter Mondale won 40 years ago. It's hard to beat somebody in their own home state. Now, it has happened, but that, and like George W. Bush barely did beat Al Gore in his own home state in 2000. And if Gore had won that state, he's president of the United States, right? But that's also a state where the demographics are not the same as Pennsylvania, okay? We have won one presidential election in Pennsylvania since 1988. And it was Trump in 2016 by the narrowest of margins. We have made major inroads in voter registrations in Pennsylvania, and we still trail by about 400,000 registrations in the state. Submitted for posterity that the demographics of Pennsylvania 2024 not the same as the demographics of Tennessee 2000. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So this would not be like beating Al Gore in his home state. This plus you're asking people who just voted this guy for governor to not, they just did it by 15 points. It's not the same. Would have likely taken the state off the board and would have really slimmed the path to 270 for Trump. So why would they do that? It would also set them up with a future standard bearer. Remind me, Shapiro's like right on the edge of Gen X and Millennial, I believe, like right on the edge of those two generations. So it gives them a future standard bearer as well. So why didn't they do that? Why did they pick an approaching retirement age white guy that almost no one had heard of and doesn't flip and auto flip anything in the Electoral College, doesn't help them on any surface level at all? They have, even in their own polls that they have been ahead in at times this year, they have performed sluggishly with youth voters. Tim Walz does not meet the profile of the young, fresh voice. That's not going to do it. That doesn't energize further their racial idolatry coalition. If you were a Hispanic that maybe voted Republican for the first time recently or thought about it the last time and didn't, all right? And you're like, I'll give the Democrats one more shot. I don't think a 60-year-old white guy from Minnesota has you thinking, yeah, I mean, that's the direction in the future I want to go. He adds nothing that Kamala Harris does not already have. So why did they do this? I think it is simple. I think they came to the conclusion that if they put a Jew on the ticket, and I think the signal was sent since that video got leaked late last week, the Hamas, CARE, Ilhan Omar, Squad, Caucus, whatever you want to call them, let it be known, if you thought what the hippies did to Mayor Daley at the Chicago Convention of 68 was the stuff of legend and cost you an election. Folks, our people aren't hippies. They're true believers. And they have been burning down cultures for 1,200 years. If you think that putting a Jew on the ticket and then one that could be the future face of the Democratic Party moving forward, we're going to make Chicago 68. We're going to make Chicago 24. Make Chicago 68 look like Disneyland before the employees were trannies. We will light this thing on fire. We will battle of the trench this thing. If you want to know what that is, go look that up. And that's why I think they made this switch. They had to go with something that would do no harm, not risk anything at all. Now, Aaron just gave you a morsel of the clips out there about Tim Walz. Let me say this about him. There's two things about him. Number one, anyone they would have put on the ticket, like we're going to say, and we're right to say it, this guy wanted to build a ladder so people could come over the wall, driver's licenses for illegals. But here's the thing we need to understand. That's the entire Democratic Party. The entirety of the Democratic Party is that stuff now. It's nothing else. You cannot get elected as a Democrat anywhere in America and not be willing to castrate children. It just can't happen. It's what the party is. It's a demonic construct. Number two, I spoke earlier this year to a group of conservative state legislators in Minnesota. And they were pretty demoralized, frankly. And the reason why is they saw in basically 2 legislative sessions, Tim Walz and his people come in and just California the entire state of Minnesota. And it's not like the Republican Party in Minnesota was any great shakes before this. But that brings me to this point. This is going to be the biggest worldview difference election I've ever voted in. And it's not necessarily about the names, Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance. It's about the worldviews that they are now fronts for. Even if you have Todd's position, which I'm warming up to. I think it's a salient observation. We're going to talk more about it next hour. That much of what Trump and his movement represents is America as it existed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. When it was still somewhat of a melting pot, where most of the center left and most of the center right could actually live together, argue at election season, and then, when that was over, you were at the high school football game on Friday night. This wasn't the stuff of unnerving and unraveling civilizations and, making it that you could never talk politics at the dinner table or with your buddies at a bar, the stuff of existential stakes that we are facing constantly now. Now, who's driving that? It's not our side. It's theirs. They've been the driver of this all along. And when you look at the records, Kamala Harris ran for president 4 years ago on Medicare for all, no health insurance. When you look at the records of these two individuals, these aren't projections. I grew up listening to Rush try to get me to vote for Romney and McCain. As much as I love Rush, didn't work. And he would say, if those guys win, they're going to do blank, 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 blank. The problem was, the other guys, their records in the Senate wasn't really that much different fundamentally from the Barack Obama they were running against. Which is why in the last debate, Mitt Romney said how many, 12 times, if I remember right? Well, you guys weren't working here then. I think I counted 12 times in the last debate, I agree with Obama. Said that 12 times in the last debate. Remember John McCain lecturing his own base not to refer to Barack Obama by his actual name, Barack Hussein Obama, because that was racist, right? Then remember John McCain, when he took the lead in the RCP polling average for the only time in September, suspended his campaign so that he could then come up with an even bigger bailout, okay, than what Obama was posing. Do you remember this? Mm-hmm. And then in the first debate after that, Obama went to his right and said, that's just giving away, that's just too much bailout money. And the election was lost right there. The difference is here, even when you throw in the disastrous 2020 year. In fact, let's just do that. Yesterday I said if we just took Trump's energy policy If all he did as president in his second term post-COVID, different than Biden, was just a different energy policy. If he did all the same mistakes, but we were more energy independent, the difference that we would be feeling economically right now would be palpable on every front. Because that's infecting inflation everywhere. That cost is getting passed on to everything, right? So let's look at 2020. I'm not walking back anything I've said pro or for Trump because I thought it was all, or pro or against because I thought it was all true. 2020 is arguably the worst year any president's ever had in the history of the presidency. I've said that all along, right?
Yeah.
If all Trump did in 2020 that he got right was the Abrahamic Accords, is that not dramatically different geopolitically than what we're probably looking at right now between Israel and Iran?
It is.
It is. Just that alone. He makes let's go replay 2020, the worst year of the Trump presidency. He makes every mistake all over again. But the one thing he got right was the Abrahamic Accords, and Netanyahu and the House of Saud are actually having direct relations and talking on the phone. Would that not, in and of itself, that even that one thing he got right in a year of calamities, which he's never repented for, and I know that's why a lot of you are still in our audience, like, I can't do this again because the guy just won't own up to any mistakes. I get that. But I think it's important that you get what I'm saying here. If we go back and replay 2020 all over again, Trump makes every mistake, and the one thing he does right is those Abrahamic Accords, the geopolitical difference in that one thing he got right compared to everything else this administration has done, again, the differences are a domino theory. And that's why even if Trump is no form of conservative, which he doesn't even claim to be, by the way, to his credit, never really claimed to be that. Even if he is Todd's metaphor of 70s, 80s, 90s era New York. We didn't hate our country in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We had moments of recessions and disappointments from Watergate to Jimmy Carter. But it was like the fringe thing to be one of those hippies burning the flag in the 70s, 80s, or 90s. Now it's called MSNBC. It's a whole channel of it. That is a dramatically different country. That country won the Cold War. That country fed the world. That country exported freedom globally all over the world. That country did. Even if that's the best we can do is that. Compared to what they are offering here, and with no chaser. This isn't like Rush back in the day trying to convince me to vote for Romney and McCain by being speculative about what people who have never been president or governor would actually do. We can look at what Kamala and this administration have done and what Tim Walz has done in Minnesota. It is closer for me to drive to the Minnesota border than to Sioux City, Iowa. And the difference in politically between my state and theirs is literally the difference between Iowa and California that is 3,000 miles away. This is the biggest worldview difference election I've ever voted in. Even if all of your criticisms of Trump are true, that's still true, actually. Which speaks, again, to the urgency of this moment, to the amount of evil that we are up against here. And they're not even hiding it. We just watch them perhaps make it this. We have a political party in America that had to decide, do we put our most strategic VP candidate on the ticket or risk exposing that we hate Jews? Forgive me. Line up the history books and tell me when mainstreaming anti-Semitism's gone well for a culture. Anybody have the chapter and verse on when that's worked out well? This is straight up demonic evil. And I want to say one more thing about this. This ominous lawfare now just has suddenly gone away, most of it anyway. Missed an assassin's bullet by the slimmest of margins. His opposition party didn't put the best ticket they could have possibly put together after doing a coup. And an economic collapse that I am sure the spirit of the age was hoping to drop next quarter after this election, they are being forced into exposing right now. I mean, if I didn't know any better, man, I mean, the hand of Providence here seems pretty obvious. There's no excuses for losing this. None. Absolutely none. No excuses, no scapegoats. The messaging just writes itself. None. And I don't want to hear any more about stealing elections because you had 4 years to do something about it. So if they do that again, that's your fault too. right, back here on the Steve Day Show, brought to you by our friends over at Relief Factor. Remember back in the day when you were agile, mobile, and hostile, when you could live a more active life, and then the pain crept in, as the song says. Well, you might have thought, you know what, that chronic pain, there's just nothing I can do about it. I mean, that might be true. We get older, right? These earthly bodies, these unglorified bodies, they aren't meant to live forever. All creation groans, of course. But it's also possible that you're giving up a little too soon. How do we find out? Well, it's going to cost you $20. That's it to find out. Take the 3-week quick start from our friends at Relief Factor. Relief Factor is the drug-free supplement created by physicians who can prescribe drugs, but they wanted to come up with something drug-free that doesn't have the side effects that pain medications can have, but would also go after the source of your chronic pain, which is probably too much inflammation in your joints. Over the years, over 1 million people have tried the 3-week quick start. About 70% of them have seen such great results that they have stuck around with the product long term. So why not see if you don't see a difference in your pain threshold in 3 weeks or less when you go to relieffactor.com. Again, try the 3-week quick start. What do you got to lose for just $20, except maybe that pain that you thought you were never going to lose? Get the 3-week quick start for $20 at relieffactor.com. Again, that's at relieffactor.com. Well, he was on the Trump campaign in both 2016 and 2020. He's out with a piece today at Real Clear Politics talking about a poll that he worked with over at American Greatness as well. Steve Cortez is our guest here on the program for the first time. Steve, it's been way much of an oversight to not have you on earlier than this, brother. How are you?
Better late than never. I sure appreciate you having me. Thank you, Steve.
You bet. Happy to have you here. Let's start, though, with the news that has broken this morning with Tim Walz being Kamala's running mate. I just want to throw at you my hypothesis of what I think occurred. I think that the strategic, not bungled leak from the Philadelphia mayor last week, I think that was a test case to see if the Hamas anti-Semitic Care Caucus would handle having a Jew, particularly a young one that could be the face of the Democratic Party moving forward. If they were going to play nice in having a Jew on the ticket, I think clearly the signal was sent that if you put a Jew on the ticket, we're going to make Chicago 24, make Chicago 68 look like Disneyland. And I think that's why they have gone with a pick that literally adds nothing to the ticket. Tim Walz brings nothing to the ticket that Kamala did not have at this time yesterday. Without him, I cannot imagine an approaching retirement age white guy helps with their sluggish performance with youth voters. That guy's not going to do anything to even more energize the racial idolatry coalition. So I think that they just figured, you know what, man, we just need a base hit up the middle here and have a peaceful convention and get the hell out of Chicago and onto the campaign. And I think that's why they picked him. Your thoughts?
Yeah, listen, I totally concur. This pick, this selection of Walz is proof positive that Kamala Harris is completely captured by and beholden to the very most radical elements of the Democrat Party, including the pro-Palestinian, pro-Gaza, anti-Semitic radicals that have unfortunately become quite powerful within Democratic circles. She is clearly scared of them. She is beholden to them because and look, I come at this from a political operative, a campaign person's point of view. This pick makes no sense, Steve. It makes zero sense. Minnesota is not a state that is in play. I've seen some folks out there try to argue that he has relevance in Wisconsin. That's not true. If anything, there's a rivalry between those two states, so it's not going to help. And to not pick Shapiro, who strategically brings an enormous amount of benefit to the campaign, because Pennsylvania may very well decide the presidency, to not pick him merely because he's Jewish and merely because he is pro-Israel is quite an indictment of Kamala Harris. And I have to tell you, too, then, on the other side, too, when we do look at Walz's record, the reality is he presided over the absolute destruction of his biggest city, of Minneapolis, in the summer of 2020, including the ransacking and burning down of a police station, something that is unprecedented in American history. So he presided over this chaos and anarchy and madness. And then Kamala Harris, and this is interesting that these two are now teaming up, of the few people who actually got caught and were going to be prosecuted and punished for that terror, really, that was unleashed upon the Twin Cities, Kamala Harris solicited money to bail those thugs out. So he lets the city burn to the ground. She then bails the Cretans out who did it. It's a remarkable, it's almost so absurd it's hard to believe, but it's a remarkable pairing in that way. You've got San Francisco meets Minneapolis, two of the most liberal cities in the entire country. That is not going to sell in Middle America. It's not going to sell in Western Pennsylvania. Not going to sell to the bad hombres in Arizona. As somebody who's advocating for President Trump, I'm thrilled by this decision. This is the best news we could have possibly gotten on a vice presidential pick.
Wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I keynoted an awards banquet for basically the conservative caucus of the Minnesota State Legislature back in March. I mean, they were beyond demoralized by what Tim Walz has done to the state in a relative short amount of time. I mean, the phrase "he turned us into California overnight," I heard that over and over and over again that evening. And so when you look at the three people that were the most speculated on, this is clearly the weakest candidate. I mean, you look at Mark Kelly, who was talked about as well. That's a guy, again, who's popular in a battleground state, so military guy. So why don't you pick him? Well, I would imagine at some point in time, Mark Kelly said, we can't have wide open borders. Otherwise, he's not getting elected statewide in Arizona. That's not happening. Okay. So if he said that at any point in time, even to just get elected and didn't mean it, he's disqualified too. Now, you've got other aspects of their left-wing idolatry, racial idolatry caucus that would lose its mind. So I think you're getting a real portrait here of the modern Democratic Party, in that it can't even triangulate the way it could in the Clinton years. It cannot do things that are strategically amenable to its goals. It cannot, put a guy that just won statewide and maybe the determinative state in the union this election by 15 points. Can't put him on the ticket. He's a Jew. Can't put a military hero guy on the ticket because he might have said at some point we can't just have an open border there in Arizona. So we've got to put the guy on the ticket that said, I want to build a ladder over Trump's wall so that we can have even more illegals in Minneapolis than we currently have. I think that gives you a window to the soul of the current Democratic Party, this particular choice right here.
That's exactly correct. And by the way, when it comes to Pennsylvania specifically, a couple aspects here, I think, in terms of, from now until Election Day into the finish that are going to matter. Number one is J.D. Vance, I think, is very, very relevant there, particularly in the western portion of the state, because his very famous book and movie, Hillbilly Elegy, really resonates with the folks of Appalachia in western, culturally, politically, and otherwise in western PA. So I think J.D. can be really, really beneficial now that you've taken Shapiro off the table. But here's the thing. It's not just as if Shapiro has only gone to neutral. The fact that this is being announced in his home state, that they are announcing in Pennsylvania that he is not, in fact, a pick, is so unbelievably insulting to him.
Which tells you he was going to be the pick. They weren't going to go to Pennsylvania to announce a governor from another state. Yeah,
it's like they politically ran him over with a car, and now they're going to back up and run him over again and embarrass him in his own state. By the way, after he completely embarrassed himself, he basically apologized for being a Jew. He was trying so hard to get the nomination that he said, I was 20 years old back then because he had some really pro-Israel pictures and happenings in his background. He basically apologized. He almost tried to un-Jewish himself, which was pathetic, of course, to try to get this nomination. And it still wasn't enough. And I believe now that Shapiro's in the interesting spot where politically, if he's all about political greed and avarice, which I think he is, he actually wants Kamala Harris to lose. So I do not believe, of course, he'll keep up with the optics, but I do not believe that he's going to be working hard for this ticket. And I think in a stealthy way, he actually prefers that she loses because he then becomes the front runner for 2028. So this is a fascinating scenario in many ways. Kamala Harris on her first major test, her first real decision that mattered since she became the nominee, utterly fails. This is a complete faceplant. As a Trump guy, I couldn't be happier that she picked Walz.
Well, Josh Shapiro is the latest to make sure that Kamala Harris has made sure he's been unburdened by what has been. So moving on now, because we originally brought you on here to talk about what's going on with working class voters in this election cycle. You just commissioned a poll with American Greatness looking at battleground states across the country. Now, this, I'm guessing, given the timing of its release, was conducted entirely before the economic meltdown that they were probably planning to dump on Trump in the first quarter of next year, suddenly hit right now in the middle of this election instead. Okay, so let's actually work your poll back to front. If you were going to recommission that poll now for the next 3 to 4 days, After when people see Apple's lost $250 billion in market cap, for example, in the last 24 hours. If you were to recommission that poll for the next 3 to 4 days, as opposed to the 3 or 4 days you did leading up to its release yesterday, what do you think might have changed in light of current events?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what would change most significantly is that wealthier people who have done well actually under Bidenomics. It's a small group of people, but of course they're quite powerful and influential. Wealthy people who have actually enjoyed an inflationary environment because they own a lot of assets, live in a paid-for house, have a lot of stocks in real estate that are inflating in an inflationary environment overall. I think what we would see is they will now start to turn. So in other words, what I found in my poll, and you're exactly correct, it was taken last Monday through Thursday. Of course, the market really started tanking last Friday into Monday of this week. So it did not include that market action. But what I found in my poll is Americans overall are very, very negative on the Biden-Harris economy, but much, much more so middle income and lower income Americans. Again, not surprising, because for the very wealthy, for the credentialed managerial elites, the Biden economy has actually worked reasonably well for them, even though it's been dreadful for the masses. But I suspect now that Wall Street is starting to arrive at a place where Main Street has long been, which is that the economy is terrible. It has been for working class people for a long time, but now that we start to see equity valuations tank, and they really have tanked, not just in the last few days, but when you look at tech, for example, in the last month, Amazon, for example, which is really the bellwether of both tech and the consumer sector. I'm no fan of Amazon as a company, but it's incredibly important as a tell, as an indicator on where American consumers are. Amazon's lost 20% in a month. I mean, that's an unbelievable move. By the way, I come from the world of financial markets on Wall Street. I did that for 25 years before I got into politics. And let me tell you, in a major company like that, the absolute biggest companies in the world like that, you just don't see 20% moves in a month in either direction. That tells you something is terribly wrong. The U.S. is tipping over, I believe, into recession. And again, I think Wall Street is starting to join where Main Street already was. That's going to hit people in the higher end. And so when we talk about those suburban women, for example, who have been really problematic for Republicans generally and specifically for Donald Trump, once they start checking and logging into their accounts and seeing what their 401k is doing, seeing what their portfolio is doing, they might be more willing to vote for Trump, or to at least not vote for Kamala Harris. That is a real possibility. So I suspect if I ran that exact same poll starting today, I would find a much lower Harris number among the wealthier folks, among the people who make more money.
All right, so final thing I want to ask you about then, because we're both data guys. I've followed your work, which is why I'm stunned we've waited this long to have you on. Frankly, we even said at the time, I thought you were the one person on the Trump 2020 campaign that was actually messaging on the election integrity questions, a message that was achievable within the limited time frame we had of actually getting to success. We both actually originally backed DeSantis in the primary. Okay, so we're just largely driven by data and numbers from what I can see looking at your stuff from afar. And so what I am fascinated by is you're showing in your numbers what even the mainstream polls are showing, which is that there have been there's been various constants. The Biden-Harris ticket, or Kamala now, sluggish with youth voters, sluggish with Hispanic voters, still winning them, but not by the kinds of margins that Democrats typically do, okay, in order to win. Right. And yet this has been either a within margin for error, with the exception of during the Biden, coup era. This has been within the MOE, or even they've even been slightly ahead, and that's in your battleground state poll. Kamala's up, I think, by 1 in your overall. And so if you're sitting down with the former president, your former boss right now, okay, where do they need to perform better then in order to compensate for the sluggish performance Democrats are having in every poll in some of their key demographics? Where would you tell the president, hey, we've got to do better here?
I would say two places. Number one is Hispanics, and in my poll of all 7 traditional battleground states, Hispanics right now Donald Trump is only down 2, so within the margin of error, effectively tied with Kamala. That is politically brutal for Kamala Harris and for Tim Walz. They need to win Hispanics and win them substantially. So we have tremendous momentum there. Continue to focus on Hispanics. The second place is low propensity white male working class voters. Those are folks who agree with Donald Trump. They are people who have been incredibly abused by the Biden agenda in many ways, and not just economically. That's the most important way. But they've also been abused because they've been told that they have privilege. They have been effectively otherized by the ruling class in this country. But they're a group of people that generally don't vote at the kinds of numbers we need. So we need to get them to the polls, and we need to be better at ballot chasing than we have been in previous elections, particularly with that group. Now, thankfully, there's a lot of planning going on, a lot of not just planning, but actual operations right now of ballot chasing, where we're going to close that gap with the Democrats. I don't think we're going to catch up to them. They have a vote generation machine that is just so far advanced beyond Republicans. I don't think we can close it entirely, but let's at least narrow that gap. And I think those are where we're going to make inroads with Hispanics and then with working class whites, particularly men who, again, may agree with us, but may not be registered or may not be planning to vote. If we do that, we're going to win, I believe, in a very close election. Look, it's going to be a close election. I have no doubt about that, but it's eminently winnable, particularly now that Harris didn't pick Shapiro and now that the stock market seems to be very much in play and could very much become a potent issue for Trump, the businessman, into November.
Steve, what's the best way that our audience can follow your work? He's an excellent follow on X, by the way, but what would you recommend?
Yeah, please. Thank you so much for having me. And follow me on X is the best place, at Cortez Steve, Cortez with an S, Cortez Steve, and posting all of my work there, including new documentaries. I've got a new one coming out on the persecution of Trump very shortly, so please be on the lookout for that as well.
Thank you, Steve. Good to have you on. We'll do it again, okay? Thank you, man.
Great. Thank you.
You bet. All right, guys. Sorry I blabbermouth most of the hour here, but your quick thoughts before we head into hour two.
The important thing is what he said at the end. Very close election. Don't get jingoistic about it. Think 2022, okay? Never forget that. We have a constellation of dots now. And people can feel lucky that Walz was picked. But it is incumbent upon Republicans, this administration, people who support him. You have to connect those dots, and then you have to set that picture to a soundtrack that makes the heart soar. That's something people don't want to do these days anymore. So nothing has been put in place that isn't automatic. Remember the lessons of 2022. Do not put this thing on autopilot.
Amen.
I've seen this take bandied about so far on social media this morning, now that it's official that Tim Walz is going to be Kamala's running mate. Something along the lines of it takes different forms, but the Democrats know they're going to lose, so they're just throwing up fodder to get somebody who has low name ID kind of out of the way. You're not wasting political. Get that out of your mind.
Absolutely.
The Democrats do not operate under the assumption anywhere down to dog catcher that they will ever lose. Correct. Do they have contingency plans? Do they have contingency narratives? You bet they do, but they never bake into the cake losing. They are all about the pursuit of power. Just because he has low name ID doesn't mean that they're somehow throwing in the towel here at all. No, they didn't do a silent coup for nothing, guys. Get it out of your head that they have this internal data shows that we're going to lose no matter what, so we might as no. That's not how they operate.
Correct.
Winning and wielding power is the only thing they care about. That has not changed today with Tim Walz.
Correct. What this tells you is that they couldn't risk destabilizing their coalition, and so they just needed to base it up the middle because they think it's within the margin of cheating and that they can just go ahead and execute from there. Which is why your point of what Cortez said at the end there about our side working harder on its turnout operation is vital here. Yeah. Hour two is next. All right, back here with Hour 2, live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I want to thank Steve Cortez for joining us last hour, and I have no good reason why we have waited all these years to have him on because we have cited and mentioned his work on the show, and I have on social media numerous times. So if we wait another 5 years before we do it again, Todd, just maybe slap me just right across the face. All right, fair?
Fair, but stuff's been going on. So
that's true. It's not like we've just been doing trivialities in the interim. And first of all, that hesitation from Todd was like, I was just gonna slap you anyway. So
for any number of reasons.
Indeed. All right. So let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. You can email us Steve at stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Like us on Facebook, Me, We, and Gab. You can follow me at Steve Deace Show on Twitter, Getter, Instagram, and TikTok. And then also, if you like the show and you are a podcast devotee, please, if you have yet to do this, leave us a 5-star review. We are a little bit less than, I think, 300 away from getting to 10,000 on iTunes, so we'd love to hit that number. And thank you to all of you for each and every one of those on iTunes, Spotify, whichever podcast platform you use. And then make sure that you hit subscribe, or if you're on iTunes, follow on your podcast platform, because that's going to assure that every time we do a new episode, it will show up in your feed every single time, because that way you won't miss one, and then we won't miss you. And we would appreciate that too. And thank all of you that have done that for us as well. Thank our friends over at Miracle Made. I've been telling you since they came on last year, and it was right when we were about to have one of the hottest Julys on record in Iowa. And they're bragging about these temperature regulating sheets with silver infused fabric and inspired by NASA. I'm like, let's find out. Well, I've been telling you for a year now that last summer was the first time ever, despite that heat, I have not had to turn the ceiling fan on to supplement the AC just to make sure I was cool enough at night to get the sleep that I wanted, right? Well, we haven't had as hot of a July as we had last year, but the last week it was as hot as it was all of July last year. And man, I had a hard time getting cooled down, and I finally had to buckle down, man, and turn the ceiling fan on for the first time at bedtime in like 2 years. And I'm like, crap, I have to figure out another talking point for the Miracle Made ad. That's exactly what I thought. Except I woke up a couple of hours later freezing. Because now that my body had settled into the temperature regulating sheets and the ceiling fan, straight up, I woke up a couple hours later. I am freezing to death. I have to get up and turn the fan off. True story. That is an absolute true story. I had to get up and turn the fan off. It was between the sheets and the fan, I was too cold. So I turned the fan off and I got back to sleep, and I slept like every other night on these sheets. They're that good. I really like these sheets. Don't mock me, Erzin.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not mocking.
I love these sheets. I do. And when we're out on the road, man, there's a definite difference for sure. So Miracle is so confident in their product that it's backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you're not 100% satisfied, you will be. But if you're not 100% satisfied, you'll get a free refund. You can upgrade your sleep right now with Miracle. Just go to trymiracle.com for Miracle Made. Trymiracle.com/Deace. That's where you want to go. Trymiracle.com/Deace. Use the code Deace to claim a three-piece towel set and over 40% off for free. And if you use the code Deace, you'll get an extra 20% off too. All right, you can't beat it. Massive discounts for a phenomenal product. Trymiracle.com/Deace. That's trymiracle.com/Deace. All right. Let's get into some idolatry or not here on the program. And we didn't have a chance with me on the road last week and everything else that was going on to delve into this. But, I mean, after a while, when I got up this morning, remembered this clip, and I thought, do we even Steve Deace Show, bro? I mean, how do we do the Steve Deace Show with the biblical worldview as our prime directive, and the most famous man in the world has pontificated on religion in the last few days, and we haven't discussed it yet? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I mean, if there was ever a show and a topic where the two shall meet, all right, and you know, what God has brought together, let no man put asunder. This would be it, all right? The most famous man in the world pontificating on faith, spirituality, and religion, and then this program. So I thought today's the day that we need to tackle this subject. And I really believe that much of what you're about to hear here lines up exactly, Erzin, with your operating thesis that you've been going with here for the last couple of weeks on the show of what, when you look at, it's hard to define Trump ideologically. I mean, he has done as president, he did some of the most conservative wish list things we had seen, but there's not a consistently conservative ideology there, right? There's just not. Okay. He wants to find himself as a nationalist, but there are plenty of people on social media that define themselves as nationalists that don't like how pro-Israel he is, right? Okay, that kind of stuff either, right? I think he's largely ideologically undefinable. And I think it's because he represents. It's not so much an ideology that Donald Trump represents, I think, as much as an era, and that's what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That Trump represents an era. And
Make America great
again. Correct. And there's even the fact that slogan was originally used by Reagan in 1980 kind of, again, reinforces your operating thesis.
I'm not just spitballing, man. This is true.
Okay. And what the other side represents, basically, they are stained glass window smashers. Like, we can all argue whether things are sacred enough to Donald Trump, and frankly, there are plenty of days that I don't think they are. Okay. What is not arguable is that nothing is sacred to his opponents. Is that fair?
Right.
Is that a fair characterization? We can all have arguments at times that things have not been sacred enough to Donald Trump and to his own detriment, and that we'll probably have some of that conversation here in a moment after we see this clip. But what is also inarguable is that to his opponents, nothing is sacred. This is
Trump is a liberal who loves his country. Yes. Democrats are progressives who hate their country.
As we would have defined a liberal in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Correct.
Now he looks like a right-winger, okay? But as we define liberal, like a Bill Clinton era liberal when we were growing up, or when the era that Aaron was born into, he more closely aligns with that, okay? What you're dealing with now are iconoclasts. They want to undo our civilization and replace it with something else moving forward, where Trump represents an era that many of us would prefer to return back to, right? And I think you're going to see a lot of that in this clip as he talks about religion, spirituality, the role that he thinks it plays in the culture and in his own life. Props to Laura Ingraham for asking the question. Watch this clip.
Trump has the tough guy image, but there's a side of him we don't often see. Here's more of our conversation with former President Trump. You has said something after winning Iowa, which a lot of people talked about, when you said, I love American cities and I'll work with anyone, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, to fix those cities.
It's true.
Where would you start? What city would you like to start with on a federal, to the extent you can have partnerships?
It's so sad to see what's happening. Now, for the most part, you have to work with Democrats. They're all, the 25 worst cities are essentially
you've
all
done that before.
Democrat. I've worked with Democrats. I lived in New York. Do you know, New York went bad when I left. Okay, think of it. New York, when I was there, was great. When I went to Washington, I left New York. I went to Washington. It started going really bad. We had a very bad mayor, but it took a little while even with him as mayor. He was a terrible, now he's teaching at Harvard how to run something. He couldn't run anything, de Blasio. He was a terrible mayor, incompetent man. Now we have a man that's very much trying. It's a hard thing for him because you have so many migrants coming into New York. It's hard for him. I hear he likes me a lot, but I hear that only through the grapevine. Maybe.
Will you work with him to try to help New York?
I work with him. I'm going to give them funds. We're going to try and rebuild these cities. Chicago. Look at the crime. So on July 4th, 117 people. This is a weekend. 117 people were shot. 17 died. 17 died.
A heartbreak.
This is in Chicago.
I asked you this, I believe it was at Normandy, at the 75th anniversary of Normandy. I'm going to ask again. What do you pray for? I know you don't like to really talk about this, but I think most people across the country see you as an important figure, a critical figure at a desperate time for the country. They think that, and they want to know that you believe there's something more than just this.
Well, I do. I think one of the reasons that our country has lost sort of everything, it's lost so much, is we don't have religion to the same extent. I mean, you look at those charts, they're so sad. I mean, it's just going bad. And the Democrats were violent and ruthless to religion during COVID. What they did during COVID, people weren't even allowed to meet outside, and they were 10 feet apart in some big field. They'd arrest everybody. They were fascists. They were horrible. That was a very bad time for organized religion. But religion, you know, it gives you some hope. Gee, if I'm good, I'm going to heaven.
Do you believe in heaven?
I do. If I'm good, I'm going to heaven. And if I'm bad, I'm going to someplace else, like over there, right? But it gives you, there's something that is so good for a country. We lost a lot.
When you pray, what do you pray for?
Well, I pray for our country. I pray for the same thing you pray. Our family and our country. We have a family, we have a country, and I guess we have a world. I pray for the world too. I stopped what could have been world wars. We are very close right now to a world war. When you look at what's going on with Russia, Ukraine, we're spending billions of dollars. Now they want offensive weapons so we can go in and hit Moscow and this. Let me tell you, we're very close to a world war. The Middle East is ready to blow up. The Russia-Ukraine thing is much more serious than you even know.
Are you worried about the Hezbollah attacks in Israel? Obviously, children's body parts were being picked up.
Yeah, they're the Iran attacks. Look, I had Iran. They had no money. They were broke. Now they have $300 billion. They made it all in 3.5 years. I said to China, if you buy oil from Iran, you can't do business in the United States anymore. Plus, I'm going to put 100% tariffs on everything you do send us, okay? So remember this. They weren't buying anything. Nobody was. Iran was broke. And I want to say this to Iran because they're listening and, they've got their ways. They would have been happy. Everybody would have been happy in the end. Everybody would have been happy. Iran would have been happy. They just can't have a nuclear weapon. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If they do, it's a whole new world order, and it's something that's going to be obliteration. I mean, and we have a man who's grossly incompetent negotiating. Now we have a woman, I think she's actually more incompetent than him. She really is. She's more incompetent. I believe that she, Kamala, is more incompetent than Biden.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe.
All right, so that clip right there.
Damn it, Sean.
That clip right there, I want us to discuss. Because I think it confirms your operating thesis. I mean, even the way that clip flows, it starts off talking about his love for urban cities, and they're all controlled by Democrats. Okay. And you have to work with these cities or work with the Democrats in these cities to get anything done. And he's basically articulating an era where someone like him could work with an Ed Koch. Okay, could work with a Daley in Chicago, okay? Because inevitably there might be ideological differences, but everybody agreed the trains need to run on time. Nobody wants to go broke here. So we're going to have to find some common ground somewhere. And now what we're dealing with is a political movement that does want us to go broke here. And so there's no common ground to be found. I just want to reiterate what I said last hour. All you need to confirm that the Democratic Party has indeed become a demonic construct is that it can no longer even do things that would strategically benefit it. It cannot pick Josh Shapiro to win a key battleground state like Pennsylvania because he's Jewish and served in the IDF. It cannot pick Mark Kelly to win a key battleground state like Arizona because you're not getting elected statewide in Arizona by saying, I want open borders 24/7, which means that runs afoul of their doctrines of demons. So they have to act in ways that are even contrary to their stated goals because they can't violate their own demonic orthodoxies. That is a perfect metaphor for where we're at right now as a country. The idea that we understood there was a time and a season for things, okay? Tease me, guy. I'm a Christmas slap, guys, but my Christmas tree's not up in August. It's not Christmas time yet, okay? It's early, okay? We may argue about whether we put it up in November, after Thanksgiving, the 1st of December, but we're arguing within the parameters of that's actually considered somewhere, at least on the periphery of Christmas time. Putting your Christmas tree up in August isn't the time, right? That's why, as much of a slap as I am, I don't have one up. Why did I bring that up? Because there were times and seasons for things. There was a time and a season where we needed to argue about these things and have elections and determine them, okay? And sometimes they could get heated, but not the kind of stuff that ruined everybody's holiday for the next 10 years and running and made your neighborhood basically inoperable. And do I even want to run into those people when taking a walk at night and I'm going, past them on the sidewalk? I mean, just look at my own neighborhood. There's a trans flag. I've walked my entire precinct. I have the only Trump flag in my precinct. Now, to be fair, I have the only presidential political flag in my precinct, and that was true, even before they got rid of Biden. That was true. Next door to me is a trans flag. It is just simply not possible for these two things to coexist. They can't, and they know that, and they're perfectly fine pushing it to a zero-sum game. What you see is that Trump believes at some point there he can roll the clock back to where this isn't a zero-sum game anymore. And that's both good and bad. I think when he was president, his belief in that led him down rabbit trails that, maybe I can cut an amnesty deal with them. Remember when he tried that? And they were like, no, we're going to take even more amnesty or nothing. Okay. On the other hand, it does demonstrate why he has put together a unique coalition in American politics that isn't ideologically driven. Because I think Todd is correct. He represents a bygone era, a New York of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which may have been more liberal than we wanted, but didn't hate the country. And if you had no problem taking vacations there, having your kid go to college in places like that, okay? When now, I mean, I won't tell you who it is. I've got a friend of mine who's Jewish, whose sister is an incredible student, and was offered a prestigious 1% internship in medicine in New York. She turned it down because she did not think she would be safe there as a Jew. That wasn't happening in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in New York City, right? That wasn't happening, okay? And I think you can see that also, guys, in the spirituality that it articulates. I think of my own home. So when Todd and I, when Gen Xers were growing up, we were told that 86 or whatever the number was, over 80% of Americans believed they were Christians or claimed to be Christians. Now, what did that mean? You believed that the 10 Commandments were basically good, that there is a God, and that the Constitution is good to live by, or what Abraham Lincoln defined once as America's civil religion. Belief in the founding fathers and the 10 Commandments and some basic theism, which isn't necessarily Christianity, but because it is greatly inspired by the Christianity that inspired Western civilization, it often associates with that iconography and messaging, right? Okay. And that's what I thought. I mean, I thought, I believe in the 10 Commandments, the Constitution, I love America, hell's only for child molesters and Osama bin Laden. Now, what happens is you get eventually, and that's why you study a book like Romans, you get confronted with your own sinfulness. And the gospel is really what Randy Gradishar is repeated back to you last hour at the Pro Football Hall of Fame last week, that all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All of us have to repent. All of us need a Savior. And there is only one sacrifice or atonement for our sins that ultimately satisfies the wrath of God, and everything else is a cheap imposter. Okay, that'll really tick him off. Okay, because if you sacrificed your son on other people's behalf and then they came back to you with a pigeon, okay, or a Bedouin, okay, or some IDF soldier that you made them walk over a mine and then offered up their shards as your sacrifice for Allah, you'd really piss God off with that, because he's already offered up the greatest sacrifice there is, himself, his son. That's basically the gospel message right there. Now, that's not what most Americans, when they called themselves Christians in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that's not what most of them meant, was it?
Right.
Most of them meant that I'm patriotic. We got the 10, I think the 10 Commandments ought to be in the schools. It's a good moral code. I try to live by it on my own. Okay. That's what he represents. And you can see him articulating that there. And I don't know if they did that on purpose or not, but Laura Ingram's crew putting those two things together, I think we just received the greatest insight into Trump's worldview. It's funny, when a guy's been omnipresent on the world stage for the last 10 years, you think, is there anything else we don't know that we haven't learned? Maybe we kind of knew some of these things in pieces. But I think that clip right there from Laura Ingram gave us the final piece of the puzzle and piecing together Trump's worldview. I think that's the most comprehensive look at Donald Trump's worldview that we have gotten yet. Gentlemen, your thoughts?
Well, this is the weather. This is who Trump's always been, and it's been when we preferred other options to him. The greater mystery in all this is how people who damn well knew this and who watched The Apprentice and who loved the New York that he loved suddenly bought the lie so quickly that he was Hitler. And that's why this message and articulating it going forward and where you do it is so important. This is theologically, this is getting all bent out of shape about Donald Trump and theology at this point. I just think it makes you look stupid. He is what he is here. The problem is where he actually needs to figure something. This message just to her, and this is why I got mad last week, and when I said we're going to lose to Kamala, can you get this message out to somebody other than Fox News? Because everybody who heard this on Fox News is voting for him no matter what. You should have been
if not a couple of times.
Yes, you should have been giving this message into the so-called speech rewrite at the end of the convention, which after you talked about the assassination got weird and off the rails and was not this.
Agreed.
You're going for everybody, Mr. Trump, President Trump, all the slappies around him, all the people are like, I just want to say, Mike, well, whoever you are, can we it's okay to love your country. It's okay to say, I want to be a good person. Yes, we can get lost in the theological weeds, but I'm going to speak. I have to put this stupid footnote on it. I'm just speaking for me. I'm Catholic. Being good's really important. It really is. All right? No matter who you are. Now, the problem is defining what good is. All right? And we get all over the place on that. But in the loosest possible terms, yes, wanting to be good, wanting to do good. Very, very, very important. And that speaks to what Steve said about that gulf between the worldviews in this election. The other side wants the exact opposite.
Exact opposite. Exact opposite.
Yes.
Yes. Aaron.
So we all have silos. Everything, regardless of how much we try to be aware of what's happening outside that silo, I don't want to say echo chamber, but that's kind of what it is. That still there's an element of that exists everywhere. Whether you're tuning into this program, whether you tune into the Young Turks, whether you tune into Bill Maher or Joe Rogan, silos exist everywhere. And it's good to remember, I believe, especially on occasions like this, that an audience like ours, if you're tuning into a show like this, you are a scant minority of a minority of a minority of people in this country. Very, very small minority of people. And I'm not saying that to discourage you. I'm just saying that's the reality. The much larger swath, much larger audience kind of exists, at least in righty America, that's not totally been given over to the spirit of the age, exists on a theological spectrum where Donald Trump is there. Hearing that now, and I didn't include this in the montage because I didn't believe it was particularly newsy. This is not new things about, we're not learning anything particularly new about Donald Trump, because back in July, I believe it was, of 2015, he was asked by Frank Luntz, have you ever asked God for forgiveness? And he said, no, I haven't. So I didn't think this was particularly new, but it does kind of answer, now that I've actually heard this over again, it does answer a question why he answered that way. It's not really something that he thinks about. He thinks that if I'm just trying my best, that's the deal. That's the deal that I make with God. If I just try my best, I'll go to heaven, right? So why do I need to ask God for forgiveness? And of course, the irony of Frank Luntz, of all people, asking that question, that's a topic for another day. But that's where most people are. I think most people in righty America kind of have this amorphous understanding that religion is kind of important and it kind of underpins us and it kind of gives our life meaning. But
even if it's not real, it serves some common good.
Yeah, it serves some common good, but it's not necessarily for me. It's for all those people. But that's really good. They should do that. And that's where a lot of people are.
Like the secular Jew we had on the show a couple of years ago that was lamenting that we're not more of a Christian nation, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of people are. Now, how do you evangelize those types of people? And I think in some ways it's harder than trying to evangelize hardened leftists. But in a lot of ways, because of our shared values otherwise, even if those shared values exist in some sort of a chaotic worldview, you can still reach those people rather easily because they don't hate you. Who's harder to reach, people who hate you or people who generally, even if they have a chaotic worldview, still share some values that you do? Mm-hmm. It's the latter, in my mind. So this is not to put a rubber stamp at all on what Donald Trump said there. At all. If you believe that your works are what determines you go into heaven, that's not how this works. Not at all. But at the same time, that's coming from a person who doesn't hate you. I don't really believe, I think there are people who in the Trump Republican Party despise people like you and me and a lot of you listening, they still want your votes, though.
Yep.
They still want your votes. That's a big difference from we want to put you in the camps if we could.
It's a pretty big difference. I mean, it's like I said, I think this is going to be the biggest worldview difference election I've ever voted in, which is also a statement of where we are at spiritually in America. It is a clear sign we need to spend more time evangelizing the right. You know, we wanted to evangelize. It's not hip to evangelize. I mentioned this the day after Trump got shot. It's not hip to evangelize the boomer there with the American flag shirt flipping the camera off as we're watching Trump. You know, we don't know, is he bleeding out? Is he hurt? Is he dead? We don't know this at the time. Remember that guy's turning around and he's flipping off the camera. Mm-hmm. All right, no one's megaopolis suburban church program for seekers is designed to get that guy. They don't even want that guy in their church. It's designed to get to the Russell Moore crowd into your church, the sweater vested, the khaki pleated. Okay, it's designed to get those people in your church. Okay, but the reality is that is one of the primary groups that we actually need to evangelize, because to your point, Aaron, they at least understand and are in some form of fight against basic good and evil. They may not understand its entire source. They may not understand what the actual weapons would be required to defeat it. You know what I'm saying? They might be spiritually immature, but they're actually at least somewhat spiritually and morally awake. Okay, it's that lazy, comfortable suburbanite we have spent 30 years getting to buy all of our best-selling books evangelizing, because they would write us big checks and they don't demand anything of us when we bring them into our churches. That's the one we're having a real hard time. We've spent 30 years evangelizing those people. Much of American evangelicalism, Aaron, has been almost exclusively suburban American focused. What's the fruit of that?
Been rife with partiality.
Yeah, and what's been the fruit of that, by the way? Would we all say that the suburbs are more to the right of where they were in this country 20 years ago?
Hell no.
Hell no. Hell no. You know? So, I mean, I don't know. If you buy into that kind of seeker-driven theology, if that's you, if your soterology is that you can essentially, come up with a message that will convince people to choose the gospel of their own free will, then I don't know. I mean, I'd probably go to the people that are more, at least somewhat awake of basic concepts of good and evil. Is it easier to convince those people of who God is when they are already recognizing what evil is? Or spending another 30 years just, with the comfortably numb suburbanites who just really can't even be bothered when it's their own kids getting transed. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The problem is, though, that first group, they don't have the money the other group does. They can't cut you the big checks. They're not going to buy as many of your books. But they also just might so happen to be extremely pivotal in whatever future Western civilization has. Because this is it. I mean, this landmass right here is the last outpost. This is it. Everything else has fallen. And the nascent Christendom countries of Eastern Europe in the post-Soviet bloc, there's no way they're going to stand in the next generation if we fall in this one. They'll be left without an anchor. Pop Culture Tuesdays next. Hey, so I've got a question for you. Are you unknowingly, at the same time that maybe you are making the fewest purchases with businesses who hate you ever have before? So at the same time that you are being conscientious about that, are you unknowingly, though, using your investment portfolio, your retirement funds, to bankroll the destruction of America? I mean, why not? If you're going to do that, in the money you're spending now, why not do that with the money you plan on having to need to spend later, with your legacy, the stuff that you've worked an entire lifetime to store up, and maybe for yourself and or for the future, for your next generation. That's what our friends at Constitution Wealth want to help you with. They can help empower you to take that stand, secure your family's future with a rock-solid investment plan, because even patriots need to retire with dignity. You can reduce the grip that demonic schemes like ESG and DEI and others have on your portfolio before you help them fund the erosion of the foundations of this great country. Start voting your shareholder votes, your proxy votes for your principals right now at the top of these woke companies. You can even divest from the companies that mock your values too. Fight the culture war with maybe your most powerful weapon, your investments. Help build the parallel economy by working as well with an investment firm comprised of professionals who are patriots just like you. Why work with any other kind? Take action now. Visit constitutionwealth.com/blaze and sign up for a free consultation today. constitutionwealth.com/blaze. That's constitutionwealth.com/blaze. Well, we've been talking about how this has become a zero-sum game. I just responded to somebody on X who says it's August 6, 2024, and Dace is finally acknowledging that politics has become a zero-sum game. Well, that's not true. We've actually been acknowledging that for the last few years. But the central criticism premise is true. I was very hesitant to immediately jump to this in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. Why? Because we had our heads in the sand? No. But because you need to understand what it means if we're going to acknowledge that politics has become a zero-sum game. That can't just be a talking point. Let me give you an analogy. I've got cancer. Someone tells you that stops you in your tracks, right?
Yes.
That makes everything else that you were discussing before and after. Oh, hey, pick the kids up from school, work some overtime at work, not sure what the wife's making for dinner tonight or if we're going out. By the way, I've got cancer. Everything that was said before and after is irrelevant because of the stakes of that statement. It's a zero-sum game. You're either going to survive it or you're not, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the only two potential outcomes. And so that when someone says I have cancer, that's a bit of a showstopper. Politically, that's the same thing when we say politics has become a zero-sum game. That's the same thing. What it means is, Pat Benatar was right. Love is a battlefield. Everything is. Everything's a battlefield. There is no, well, we're just going to set this aside. You got a trans flag in your yard. I've got a Trump sign in mine. But we can set this thing aside. Can we? I mean, you think Jesus is Lord, and I think Jesus is actually coming back to kill all you Christians for blaspheming the law. Nevertheless, what do you guys think about what the top marginal tax rate here in Asia Minor ought to be? Doesn't that just sound stupid to say that out loud? Yeah. Things become a zero-sum game at that point, which means one worldview is walking out of here and one worldview is not. By the way, Asia Minor, you guys know what country that is today? Turkey. Well-known enclave of Christianity, no? It once was. It's not now. Why? That's what happens when things become a zero-sum game. We don't do dynamic scoring. Culture war is not supply-side economics. Rising tides don't lift all boats. Someone's boat gets lifted and someone else's boat gets sunk. So do not cavalierly state something as a zero-sum game. Don't make it a talking point on social media to show you're tough or based. Because if you're going to accept that this is a zero-sum game, you now have convicted and indicted yourself of having to take extraordinary action in response to that. Much more than keyboard warrior, I typed out zero-sum game. You might have to go to a school board meeting or two.
Uh-oh.
You might have to confront somebody at Thanksgiving for bringing their MSNBC talking points to ruin another holiday or not. It's a zero-sum game. So I've acknowledged this before on the show, but I was slow to acknowledge it because I recognize what that means historically if we do. If we are saying this then. And for me as a Christian, I'm commanded to be meek. That's power under control, right? So I'm not looking to bully. I'm not looking to dominate. I'm not necessarily looking to conquer as an instinct. The Crusades were not a conquering instinct, by the way. And many people think that's the saddest chapter in the history of Christendom. That was a defense action against the Muslim instinct to conquer. So what happens when this becomes a zero-sum game is everybody ends up showing who they really are. And everybody ends up showing what it is they really believe. And once that occurs, it becomes very difficult to share cultures with people because you recognize these are incontrovertible differences. And it gets way down into the water table, like way down. Like during COVID, Terry Bradshaw starts referring to ivermectin as horse paste, when I promise you, Terry Bradshaw couldn't even pronounce ivermectin like 10 minutes before that. He was just given a talking point. Probably would have no idea that it won a Nobel Prize. It's been given to tens of millions of people. Probably has no clue. He's just a simp for the regime. He's just given a sheet, talking points. He's repeating what he's paid to say. But that's what happens when it becomes a zero-sum game. It seeps so far in that even things where we used to go to get away from politics, to just enjoy being Americans and Americana, everything now is a battlefield. Let me show you a tweet from yesterday that makes this point here on Pop Culture Tuesday. So Trey Wingo, forgive me, St. Louis, I believe he's from, wasn't it? So I think it's St. Louis. I think he's a Middle America guy. For many years, he was one of the lead anchors of the NFL coverage on ESPN. So Midwest guy, covered a pretty diverse sport like the NFL, surrounded by people with different opinions, right? In response to Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker being given a contract extension yesterday. By the way, Aaron, you're the resident Chiefs expert here on the panel. Is Harrison Butker good at his job?
He's very good at his job. I'm never really nervous when a big kick is on the line in the playoffs, and that says something.
Maybe the best at his job alive in the world right now. In response to this, Trey Wingo tweeted this out. The Harrison Butker extension, making him the highest paid kicker, underscores the inherent truth of the NFL. The better you are at the job, the more a team is willing to put up with, pure and simple. Now, this is true. This is true of meritocracies. In fact, if you go back and look at the speech I gave almost a month ago at the Family Leadership Summit, where I named Harrison Butker my first half of 2024 Man of the Year, this was one of the, and we played that speech here on the show, one of the things I said to the men was, be excellent at what you do. If you're excellent at what you do, they're going to have to put up with your belief system. Much more than they're otherwise going to be willing to. And Harrison Butker is proof of this, right? But here's the thing that is important about what Trey Wingo is saying. It's the context by which he's applying this. In the last few years, how many months have gone by without some headline of an NFL player beating a woman, beating his kids, getting drunk behind the wheel of a 2,000-pound missile and risking somebody's life, maybe their own, right? In the last few years, how many months have gone by where that has not occurred? The same day Harrison Butker got his extension to become the highest paid kicker ever, Tyreek Hill got an extension, another former Chief, by the way. Tyreek Hill got an extension to become the highest paid wide receiver ever. What's he got? 27 baby mamas and 35 kids?
You're not joking.
I'm even slightly exaggerating with that. How much drama do you think that brings into a locker room? All of that baby drama, all of that baby mama drama. How many days do you think Tyreek Hill is completely focused on his craft? And his phone's not blowing up constantly. Your kid did this. My child support payment didn't come here. Right? That can absolutely interfere. There's a lot of talk that last year would happen to the Buffalo Bills. There was a love triangle within their own clubhouse and locker room, and it ended up disrupting the team last year, and they underachieved. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's openly discussed on a lot of sports podcasts that I listen to. Yet did Trey Wingo tweet out, Man, with all those women coming in out of Tyreek Hill's life and all those kids that he's having out of wedlock that he can't keep track of, I mean, you know that has to be a distraction in players' talk. But given how great of a receiver that guy is, you're going to put up with it. Did he tweet that about that?
Probably not.
Hey, Deshaun Watson was accused, was it 20 women, I think it was? How many women said that he molested them, assaulted them in some way? Did Trey Wingo tweet out, you know what, though? If you're that good, the Cleveland Browns will still trade 5 years worth of draft picks for you. No, we get this now for Harrison Butker. Because Trey Wingo is not really making a point about meritocracy.
Nope.
He's making a point about his own worldview. And what Harrison Butker, his crime to Trey Wingo is being an actual Catholic, so let me use a Catholic term here. Harrison Butker's crime is his beliefs are anathemas to Trey Wingo's. When we get so deep now into the water table of a culture that the contract, think about what happened yesterday. We are all sitting here waiting to see what level of attack Iran levies at Israel, right? We're all watching our crypto accounts and retirement accounts just gone in 60 seconds. But what's got Trey Wingo's panties in a wad is the contract for a kicker on a team. Why? Who's all the way, by the way, really damn good at his job. Why? Because of what that kicker believes. Trey Wingo is literally 3 Mai Tai short of becoming another ESPN alum, Keith Olbermann, and just losing his damn mind. Remember the woman on NFL Network earlier this year made the same comments right as her network was laying almost everybody but her show off. And she's like, Harrison Butker's lucky we're not on the air right now. I'm like, no, sweetie, you're lucky you're not on the air right now because your ass would have gotten laid off too. But as Todd likes to say, when the lie becomes the point, when they look to pester you, when going back to the same thing we just said about Kamala's VP pick, it doesn't benefit Trey Wingo's career at all to go there. Doesn't at all. First of all, he's a straight white male. The networks, if he wants another job at another major network, they've got plenty of other non-straight white males that they can hire to articulate the same message and get the full bonus points from the spirit of the age. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't benefit him at all to do this. But he can't help himself. He's seething. Because the righteousness that Harrison Butker is communicating is anathema to him. He has to react. Has to. Like you and I had to react to the opening ceremonies of the French Olympics for the sacrilege it displayed towards us. Harrison Butker is sacrilege to Trey Wingo. That's what he's telling you. Okay? Deshaun Watson, not sacrilege. Tyreek Hill, not sacrilege. You and me, Harrison Butker, we are. And that's further evidence of what a zero-sum game means. Nothing's off limits now. Nothing. So do not cavalierly make these kinds of pronouncements. You don't say, I got cancer, let everybody grieve, and then go, psych. That you'd be a terrible person. Because what it'll take to beat your cancer requires some form of an extraordinary action. It's just a matter of how extraordinary. Similarly, do not just cavalierly say it's a zero-sum game, because what it will take, if you're going to acknowledge that, it's going to take more than based tweets. I can promise you that. A lot more. Because zero-sum game means, what's the first word of zero-sum, guys?
Zero.
Zero. Which means someone's going to be the zero here when we get finished with the math. Someone's worldview will be the zero. All right, Todd and Aaron, we'll get your thoughts here in a second after I remind folks about our friends at Hillsdale College. They are one of the few that are still on the narrow road among our major universities. They are still offering that inspiring portrayal of Thomas Jefferson as he reflects back on the meaning of the Declaration of Independence in a letter he wrote later in his life. You can watch this outstanding video. It's perfect for back to school right now, by the way. Go check out this video. You can get a commemorative free copy of the Declaration of Independence as well when you go to daceforhillsdale.com. F-O-R, daceforhillsdale.com. Once again, head over there right now to watch this video and get your copy of the Declaration at daceforhillsdale.com. All right, guys, what do you think?
He can't help himself comment, and I think that's a direct quote, is as important a point as anything you made out of that. This is what I mean about soap operas for men, guys. It gets inside you in ways, and even if you think you're on the right, the political right, that you don't understand, it makes people soft. You have met, this is a 24/7 part of your life, and it drips until you start signing off on things and ways of living that you don't fully understand. I absolutely agree with that sentiment from Steve. This is why I'm so stubborn about this point. It's making you dumb and soft. It's become your idol. You value it too much. You need to change that.
There is no, Babylon Bee had an amazing headline this morning about how feminists are warning young men not to marry successful, muscular NFL players who care for them, provide for them, and praise them in speeches. But there's no amount of that just juxtaposition that's going to change the spiritual darkness that infests the souls, the very souls of people like Trey Wingo. He's making this sound like Harrison Butker murdered, 100 people.
Yeah.
He's making it sound like that. When there are countless, as you said, examples of the National Felon League. Oh, he got a contract extension. Oh, he got a contract extension. Quiet as kept. Quiet as kept. That is absolute. That's not just partisan bickering. That is absolute spiritual darkness. Mm-hmm. That is, as Todd would say it, just don't let anything come between me and my game. Just don't let that interrupt the game. Okay, he said something at Benedictine College. Okay, it's not good. Oh, it's not good. Let's just get to the games. That's not a political problem, guys.
We're going to stick around and do overtime for subscribers. For the rest of you, we will see you tomorrow, noon to 2 Eastern, right after Glenn Beck here on The Blaze. Until then, Romans 8:28.